Folks, we're about to see a wave of panic selling in the US housing market in neighborhoods like this because people now are reaching the point in this economic cycle where they're running out of money. New data from the US Census Bureau, it shows that median household income, it declined again in 2022, 3 years in a row. After-tax income declined by over 8%, the biggest drop in US history. And as the standard of living for Americans keeps declining, we're going to see people begin to convert their house equity into cash as they run into financial binds. And when that happens, inventory, which is very low today historically, will explode onto the US housing market, and we are going to see cascading declines in home values. And one way that you can understand the issues that homeowners in America are having right now is by looking at the amount of Americans who aren't getting insurance on their house. 12% of Americans, which accounts to over 10 million houses currently, are uninsured. They don't have the money for homeowners insurance. They're electing not to do it. Why don't people have money for homeowners insurance? It's because they don't have money in general, everyone. The personal savings rate in America is at a record low, 3.5%. Americans are only saving 3.5% of their gross income on average. That's just as bad as it was in 06-07 before the last big crash. And what that says is that for a little while, maybe Americans can get by with low savings. They can take out more money on their credit card. They can get home equity lines of credit on their house to get some extra cash. But that's not a sustainable situation, everyone, especially now that interest rates are at their highest level in over 20 years. Short-term interest rates right now are almost 5.5%. 30-year fixed mortgage rate is almost 7.5%. I mean, folks, this is crazy. The typical house payment for a home buyer, mortgage, interest, property taxes, and insurance, if they get it, now close to $2,900 a month. That's by far the highest level of all time, and it's almost $1,000 more per month than the typical rent for an apartment in America. So we're going to see these buyers out of the market for a while as we see more sellers enter the market, especially sellers on homes like this. You can see behind me, you can tell this house is vacant. You can't even get in the front door with how overgrown the shrubs are. You could tell they haven't really mowed in front of the garage in a while. And so this is one of the many vacant houses in America. In this zip code, in fact, 11% of all the housing units are what I call shadow inventory. They're vacant. Some are completely vacant. Others are part-time homes. Because what I think is really interesting in this zip code is that this is a low inventory zip code currently. Only 19 houses are for sale actively compared to 50 before the pandemic. So inventory in this zip code's down by 50%. But that low inventory, it's not going to last, everyone. Because let me show you something here. The 19 homes for sale in this zip code comprise 0.8% of all the owned houses. So there's 2,300 owned houses in this neighborhood and zip code. 19 are for sale. That is a low inventory level. If we look on a map of America, we can see that the lowest inventory percentage in relative terms, it's in the Northeast and Midwest, kind of this Rust Belt area of America. 0.5% of the houses are on the market, maybe 0.7% of houses on the market. We also have low inventory in California, but if you actually look more to the south in America, you see much higher levels of inventory in states like Tennessee, Texas, Georgia, Florida. The inventory levels in those states are over 1%, in some cases 1.5% to 2%. In a metro like Austin, which is in a housing crash, prices there are down 15%, rents are down 5%. The inventory level is 1.7% of all the homes in Austin are now listed for sale. So think about that, everyone. In Austin, all it took was going from 0.6% inventory to 1.7% inventory. Prices crashed. All the housing market bulls, they want you to think that low inventory means home prices will never go down. No, folks, it's actually the opposite. Low inventory means that there's basically no margin for error for that housing market. And for instance, in the zip code, there's 10 times as many homes that are vacant in shadow inventory as there are homes for sale. What happens if 20% of the people with vacant homes decide to sell? What happens if 1 to 2% of the 2,300 homeowners default on their mortgage? You begin to realize that it's very easy for inventory to increase in a scenario where the economy continues on its trajectory towards a downturn. And ultimately, this is where the rubber meets the road on the US housing market, inventory, and home prices. If you're a buyer and investor trying to understand where prices and inventory are going, you got to understand the macroeconomy. Right now, the forward-looking indicators on the economy, they do not look good. Job openings in America, they're down 22%. They're crashing. The unemployment rate, it's starting to go up, even though it's still historically low. But the biggest issue to me is wages and income. Median household incomes are contracting, adjusted for inflation. Additionally, you look at wage growth in America for blue-collar workers, wage growth is heavily decelerating now. So if wages aren't gonna grow up to the level of home prices and house payments, how could the housing market sustain its current bubble overvalued level? The answer is it can't. It never has in US history. But now what some of the people say who who are bullish on the housing market. I see investors say this. I see people like Barbara Corcoran say this. I see a lot of realtors say this. They say that when mortgage rates drop, things are going to go crazy again. And when mortgage rates go from 7 to 5.5%, they say that all these buyers are going to rush into the market and home prices are going to surge even more. But I'm curious, do these people actually have any fundamental connection to Americans right now? Are they looking at any of the data? 82% of Americans today say it's a bad time to buy a house, according to Fannie Mae. Because the big issue for Americans is not mortgage rates, it's home prices. I actually polled you guys here on my channel and I asked you, what's the number one thing preventing you from buying a house right now? And overwhelmingly, 70% of you said home prices are too high. Only 10 to 15% of you said mortgage rates are too high. This is the one thing you can never change when you buy a house is the location. That's one thing. But the other is the price you pay. The same house in the same neighborhood could be either a good deal or a bad deal, depending on the price you pay. If you were to pay $500,000 for this house near the lake, probably a bad deal. If you were to pay $350,000, probably a good deal. And as I'm walking along here in this neighborhood, folks, in upstate New York, we're seeing more and more of, guess what? Vacant houses. This is another vacant house. We saw it in the data of shadow inventory. We're walking around the neighborhood. We're seeing it with our own eyes. I want to encourage you guys, go on Reventure app, look at the data for shadow inventory in your market, because areas of the country with lots of shadow inventory are going to be more exposed to inventory increases and home price declines. And I'm specifically looking at Florida when I say that. When you go across Florida, you can see in metros like Naples, over 30% of the owned houses are vacant. 30% of the owned houses are vacant. Think about that, everyone. I mean, it means that when you look at Naples' inventory percentage, which is a bit above 1% right now, it means there's 30 times more vacant houses than houses for sale. And so you got to ask yourself, say the economy continues on its downward path. If only a handful of those owners have some type of economic issue, they're going to sell and they're going to double or triple or quadruple inventory very quickly. Now, we just walked another block. We have another vacant house. There's a car in the driveway, no license plate. And then you can see here the front lawn hasn't been tended to, and it looks like years and years. It'd be interesting to see inside the house how in disrepair it was. Could someone potentially buy this and spend not that much money to fix it up and live in it? I'm not sure. But folks, it's not just about vacant homes and shadow inventory. It's just about simple math. Like, I see a lot of people out there on YouTube and Instagram. They say things like, this housing market won't crash because there's no supply and there's no bad mortgages or bad loans. Like, I'm seeing this repeated over and over again by people who are bullish on the housing market. But the funny thing about these people is they would have been the same ones in 2006, 2007 saying that there wouldn't be a crash. Because if you go back to 06, 07, which is a very similar kind of time period in the economy and housing market, you could see the mortgage default rate was very low. The foreclosure rate was very low in 2006, beginning of 2007. And then it exploded. It exploded when the economy hit a downturn. You could see historically the mortgage default rate and the unemployment rate are extremely correlated. And so this low unemployment rate, which is now increasing, this explains why we're not seeing that much for selling right now. However, as the unemployment rate gets to 4% and then 5% and then 6% and maybe even 7%, the mortgage default rate will go up. That's what history says. And when the mortgage default rate goes up, there's going to be more distressed selling situations. Because remember, everyone, home buyers in America today, they are the most house poor they have ever been. The debt to income ratio for home buyers in today's housing market, it's 40%, meaning the average buyer is spending 40% of their gross income on their debt costs. At the same time, down payments today are close to the lowest level on record. Average down payment of around 16%, according to data from Fannie Mae over the last 5 years. It was 21%. People were putting 21% down in the mid-2000s. So think about that, everyone. In the biggest housing bubble of all time, with all the bad mortgages that everyone talks about and the 10 million foreclosures, people were putting more money down on average back then, according to the data, than they are today. But there is one way, everyone, that the housing market might not crash. There is one way that I could be totally wrong about my predictions on the housing market, and that is related to inflation. Specifically, if inflation were to go out of control, and when I talk about out of control, I'm talking about like 8, 9, 10, 11% inflation for not just 1 year, but for 5 years. If we were to see that like we saw in the 1970s, that theoretically could prevent home prices from declining. Actually, one of you guys in my comments section of my last video, you asked a great question. You said, could there be a floor put on home prices by inflation? And theoretically, There could. And we're now seeing, inflation's going back up. The price of food, the price of gas is increasing. The most recent inflation report measured 0.6% monthly inflation, 0.3% excluding food and energy. Both of those were above expectations. However, here's the problem for the housing market, everyone. Food and gas inflation is not good for home prices. That's not good for home buyer demand. All food and gas inflation means is that Americans have less money to purchase houses like this. It means that people's standards of living is going to continue to decline. Rather, the type of inflation that's good for home prices in the housing market is specifically wage inflation and rent inflation. Wage and rent inflation is what we would need to see for the housing market to theoretically not crash. Because all of a sudden, if Americans were to get 10% raises every single year, they could start to afford the prices and the payments again. The problem is, we're seeing the exact opposite of that occur. According to ZipRecruiter, 48% of companies are now reducing pay for the same position year over year. We're now seeing Walmart cut starting wages for their employees by $1 an hour. That's a 6 to 7% cut. Bank of America, they're reporting that wage growth is plummeting across the income spectrum. They're showing actually that wealthy people are seeing the biggest drop in wage growth year over year. And so we're not seeing the type of wage growth right now we need to see to bring affordability back into the housing market. Now, on the contrary, in the 1970s, during that period of great inflation where the housing market prices boomed over the 70s, why did they boom? Well, you could see wages throughout the entire 1970s surged. 7%, 8%, 9% wage growth for over a decade. Fast forward to today, we had a bit of a spike in wages in 2021, around 6.5%, 7%, but now that's dropped back down very, very quickly, which makes home price declines the path of least resistance to return the housing market back into balance. But to see those declines, we're gonna need to see inventory go up in a lot of different markets across America. We're gonna need to see more forced selling, more panic selling, more mortgage defaults. Unfortunately, that's what it's going to take to bring more listings to the market, more inventory. And what I would encourage you to do, if you're a home buyer or real estate investor, trying to understand your market, go on Reventure app, www.reventure.app, and look at the inventory data in your zip code historically. That data, it's going to tell you a lot. Like in this zip code, inventory is down 60%. You're going to have a tough time being a buyer if that's the case. But if you were to go to Dallas and a northern suburb around Dallas, you can see inventory is way up, days on the market is way up, price cuts are way up. Home prices in this market are likely to decline into the future. Additionally, I'm excited to announce Reventure app 2.0 will be released in the next 30 days. I'm going to be adding lots of new features, completely redesigned UX, much more user-friendly. But in addition, there will be a paywall going up around premium data points. So if you want to access this data like shadow inventory before the paywall goes up, do it now.